Welcome to Girl on the Go, the podcast, breaking down politics as we know it and removing all the bullshit.
Because politics needed a rebrand.
Welcome back to Girl on the Go, the podcast. I almost said top stories of the week. Just confusing myself. But speaking of top stories of the week, our episode dropped yesterday. And for all of you who haven't listened yet, definitely go check it out because we talk about the top political news stories that you need to know for the week. So obviously head on over there at some point. But to just really recap what we talk about, 6-month mark of the war in Ukraine, and we provide some of the updates of what's happening with that currently and how the White House is kind of focused on that at the moment since the House and Senate are in recess. We also talk about the primaries that you need to watch this week. We also talk about how The Hill had an article that basically said the GOP is worried about the midterms. So go check it out. Go find out why. And let us know if you have any questions.
That's the scoop. That's the tea on that. Other thing to discuss, because I am obsessed. Obsessed. I can't get enough. Can we talk about this corn song? Because nothing has given me more serotonin in the last 24 hours than this goddamn corn song, which if you guys don't know, on TikTok, there's a song going viral right now. And it's a combination. Basically, there's this little kid. I don't really know the context of like why he was like eating corn and like where he is. Nonetheless, he's getting interviewed. And they're like, why do you like corn? And he's like, it's got the juice. And it's like this whole like really adorable little kid giving this like interview on corn. And it's like the most wholesome thing. And someone made like remixed it 1,000% like the best. This is the best jingle of 2022 so far. Yeah. And now it's going viral. I've already made 2 videos with it. I can't stop listening to it generally. It's like literally like not even 30 seconds long, but it is so cute and I am obsessed. And our entire freaking page, For You page, is going to just be corn videos and Maddie's going to kill me. But I'm obsessed. I also just would like to say that one of the ones I did just make, the advice stands on, and that is that if you are a candidate or elected official in Iowa or any other state that has like really big corn production or farm operation, you should absolutely use this. I would just like to say, I actually really hate corn. That's the irony of this whole thing.
Oh my God, I love it. I had corn last night too, and I had this like delicious corn elote at this Mexican restaurant. And I live for corn. And that's why I love the video so much, just because I can just relate to that boy. I'm like, it's so juicy and delicious. And I just relate to him and, you know, his passion behind corn. Moving forward into some political stuff, because every single Monday, when we record our top stories, something breaks about the Trump drama. And we got a little bit more information yesterday. A New York Times story broke yesterday afternoon, evening, about the Trump raid. And basically, here's the story. Trump reportedly held on to more than 300 classified documents after leaving office, which is so fucking crazy. And I also want to know some context of like how that was even allowed. Have any other presidents done this? And like, what are they allowed to keep? What are they kept in the loop about? Like, you know, like as a former president, like, do they get briefings still? You know, like, I'm just so curious about the dynamic of that.
You know what? I'd be curious of also in that dynamic is if there's ever a time where a past president helps brief a current president.
Yeah, well, the whole transition period is that's how it's supposed to be. But Trump literally didn't do that because he was so against the fact that he lost. But yeah, there's like supposed to be like a huge like helping period where you are transitioning the next president into office. It's like how the country has functioned until literally 2020 and 2021. But anyways, so half of which of these classified documents were recovered in January actually by the National Archives, which was what actually alerted the Justice Department and ultimately led to the FBI search of his Mar-a-Lago property. And then the New York Times, their story that came out yesterday, cited multiple sources who have been briefed on the matter that the sheer volume of classified marked material recovered by the government is what triggered this federal criminal investigation into the president. So 15 boxes turned over to the National Archives earlier this year included CIA, FBI, and National Security Agency documents involving national security. And then 3 days after the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, Washington Post reported that some of the documents recovered in that search were related to nuclear weapons, which we've talked about. Just so fucking crazy that this man like has this information. And like also like just back to the whole like paper versus digital moment, like how do we know this isn't like scanned in his computer somewhere, or like his team has it somewhere, has copies, you know? It's just like the physical papers of it all is just another thing to think about.
That is a really, really good point. I also, this got me thinking, you know, like when you read like a bill, proposed legislation, or whether it's in its final form, and the formatting is so long and wacky. Is it really 300 pages, or is it like 300 pages, very important information, but really if we printed this, if we were paper saving, you know, how many pages would we really have?
These are the questions that haunt us, you guys. But what also haunts us is what really is like at stake here. And I think a lot of like people have been like, okay, like FBI raid, what is this actually going to do? My mom calls me like every week and she's like, I don't think anything's going to come from this. He never gets in trouble, blah, blah, blah. But basically what could happen is federal authorities are investigating Trump for possible violations of the Espionage Act, among other statutes. Why don't we give a little definition moment for the Espionage Act?
Ooh,
might as well.
Very smart.
The Espionage Act of 1917. She's old, folks. But it was an outgrowth of the federal government's efforts during World War I to contain not only espionage, but other public criticism of its war efforts. And so the fact that literally, can we just talk, like, this is what we said, like, when this first broke, was that this man who, like, has been impeached for, like, colluding with foreign countries is now holding on to top secret classified documents, including about our nuclear weapons and our nuclear programs. What was he going to do with this? What is he going to do with this? You know?
I mean,
and the fact that the Espionage Act is involved here just shows the weight I feel like that this carries. And I feel more confident than ever. Still not fully confident that like something could come from this, because this is like,
I agree.
Yeah.
Because I have to say, like, during like the January 6th hearings, like the first round of them, aka there's more to come, but in that I was like, well, yeah, a lot of this evidence is incredibly damning, but like, as like the Republicans often call him, like, he's like Teflon Don, like everything's just somehow just bounces off him, even though it's like incredibly obvious and there's enough evidence to be like, this guy's guilty as shit.
Yeah.
Totally. And so I was like, you know, I mean, this is great. I don't want to say never, given like, even like if you listen to top stories, you'll learn that we are very surprised at how the summer went for Dems. So like, you never say never. But I just was like, really, okay, fingers crossed. But like, I wouldn't put any money on it, wouldn't be betting on it, wouldn't be a betting gal. But this puts stuff into a different perspective.
I mean, the bottom line is that this man, everything that happened in his presidency, there's the first impeachment, there's January 6th, which literally he wouldn't leave office, literally tried to overthrow our government in order to stay in office. Now is like holding on to classified documents, and like now is also endorsing and promoting candidates who are election skeptics into the role that oversees elections, and waiting to see what happens this election, to see who of his, you know, cronies also get into office that can ultimately help him steal the presidency in 2024. Like, how it's, again, just like,
you know what's really so odd to me, aka this just shows he is so clearly deranged, is not that what the people I'm going to describe aren't either in their own way, but like, if you like power, you like money, like why do you need to be president? Honestly, that's not even like a great job for you. Like, that's kind of shitty. Like, you have to, like, as the US president, you have to do shit. Like, you are a workhorse. Like, look at like literally like all of the presidents when they started and when they ended, and like how much gray hair they have by the end. Like, regardless of whether you're a terrible person and you're doing a terrible job, or a good person or not, like, it doesn't matter. It's definitely a stressful job. You're doing actual work in some capacity. And like, why do this? Why not just be some rich asshole like schlub on your yacht in the middle
he's not
of
smart
like
enough. He's never even been like a real rich person. He, you know, inherited money. Almost every single business venture of his failed.
Although he is kind of like a smart scammer in a way.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You know, it's like,
but
it's a certain type of intelligence.
Criminals too.
He's definitely like, well, this is what I think always confuses other people as well. Is like, is he just really that dumb, or is he like secretly smart and he has us all tricked? And I feel like it's a little bit of a combo, because like when you go down the rabbit hole of how many small businesses he's totally stiffed, the strategy there basically of like what I've read and makes total sense to me is basically like you stiff these small businesses. If they try and sue you for the money owed, they don't have the money to actually sue you. They're going to spend more money in litigation than they are actually going to get from him. He creates these scenarios in which he scams people, commits, you know, crimes
His
against these
entire
small businesses.
platform was genius. Like, when he ran for president, he's literally like has videos or wherever he's saying he's a Democrat in his past, and he's never been this like crazy conservative bigot, like in his public facing world. Privately, sure, grab him by the pussy vibes, but like, you know, that's never really been his brand. And then when he stepped into the political space, he knew what to do and what to say in order to get that base and get them so fired up and feed into that like echo chamber they've already been stuck in due to like Fox News and Facebook and all of that shit. Like, he knew exactly how to communicate to them and how to make them loyal to him. And like, for that, he's smart. And again, I don't know if that's him or just like somebody who, his team, who was like, this is how we do it. This is how we get the presidency.
Right. Because see, that's the thing though. It's like, I also think that there's like a lot of people on his team that are equally like moronic. Like some of the, I mean, Rudy Giuliani is a great example of that. But like, there's so many people where you're like, guys.
But it's like, you know, those just like crazy crime docs, like, or even just like Fire Festival, like, that guy is like the same vibe where it's like he's low-key smart and like you're also just shocked at the way he keeps getting away with shit, you know?
Yeah.
But he's also super dumb, but like also kind of smart. But yeah, he's, you know, there's, you know, those documentaries where you're just like, how is this person just keep getting away with it? I'm like, maybe it's just their like manifesting skills. They just like know, they're like, nope, I'm never gonna get caught, and they just keep manifesting that for themselves.
I think there has to be like a sort of like a lack of self-awareness, obviously. Like there's got to be some situation in which you just are so delusionally like thinking like, even if shit hits the fan, you can't even think that would happen. And if it
white
does, you
male
just somehow,
rich
like,
privilege, I feel like can do that, you know.
It does. It really clouds the atmosphere.
Well, we just cracked the code, but
we did.
Anyways,
we did.
I don't know. Well, you heard it here first. Sam and I are hopeful that, you know, something can come from this. I don't know how it couldn't at this point with like all this shit that's coming out. If it doesn't, I'll just lose hope and everything. But we need to get into our episode and introduce our guest.
Naturally. Okay, so if you listened to yesterday's episode, you may have already gotten a hint at this. So this is also your cue to start listening to our top stories episodes if you're particularly curious as to who the guest episode is going to be in a specific week, because we do a little teaser. We let you know in advance. So you get to find out there and only there who the episode's going to be with. So nonetheless, this episode is with Gabe Roth. He's the executive director of Fix the Court. We look at the Supreme Court and various reforms that have been proposed, have been discussed. So whether it's term limits or expanding the court, we look into all of the different avenues, or at least some of the key avenues that have been discussed. Again, what those look like, what the possibilities are there. You know, are there pieces of legislation that would support that? Are there representatives that are behind it? What would happen in certain scenarios? We go into it. Go into it. So if you walked away from June being like, what the hell is the Supreme Court? And you're scared for October 3rd when they go back into session again. Yeah, well, this is definitely an episode to gear you up. So anyways, without further ado, here's Gabe. We are super excited to chat. We have lots to talk about. Lots. But of course, we want to set the ground. Here, we want to give everyone the lay of the land. And you are the executive director of Fix the Court. And we want to know what the organization is about. What do you guys do? Give us sort of the run of show of Fix the Court.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Fix the Court's a national nonpartisan organization that I started in 2014 that advocates for more transparency and accountability in the federal courts and primarily in the Supreme Court. So that means we want things like cameras in the courtroom. We want term limits for the justices. We want ethics reform, recusal reform. We want to know more about the justices' travel and who's paying for it. We want to know more about or have better access to their financial disclosures and to their public appearances, and generally just bring the third branch of government kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Totally. I think that's so interesting, actually, to even think about the amount we just don't know about the Supreme Court, and I feel like it just goes under people's noses. And cameras in the courtroom is such a interesting proposal that would bring more transparency and just people more aware of the power of the Supreme Court, especially with everything that's going on right now. But to move forward, like, how did you really get involved in this mission? Like, what brought you to start this, and what was really the catalyst and origin story here?
Sure. So my background's in broadcast journalism. I graduated college in 2004 and took a gap year, and then did grad school and got a degree in broadcast journalism from Northwestern. And worked in local TV news for a little while, but really did not like it. Local news is, if it bleeds, it leads. It's very depressing. And so I was always interested in politics and national stories. So I moved to DC and started working in political consulting. And just by coincidence, I had a lot of clients that had cases in the federal courts. Everyone from, people that trying to close down Guantanamo to dreamers who were, trying to get citizenship or at least a path towards legal status, voting rights plaintiffs, same-sex marriage plaintiffs. Some of these cases, you'd have folks in Texas and their case would be in DC, or folks in Maine or California and their case would be in DC. And they couldn't afford to travel. So they wanted to be able to watch their cases unfold live, just like they could if it was happening in a congressional hearing, and they couldn't. So I started something called the Coalition for Court Transparency in 2012, did that for about 2 years, and then changed to Fix the Court, because it wasn't just this broadcast issue that made the Supreme Court the most powerful, least accountable part of our government. It's also the ethics and the recusals and the life tenure and such.
Yeah, there is lots to it. And I feel like there's not just one fix to it all, definitely a few layers. So we want to get into some of those, including the code of conduct. So we've heard this sort of thrown around that there's a code of conduct for judges. What is this? Does this apply to everyone? Is this like one of those things where it's everyone but SCOTUS? Can you give us the run through there?
Yeah, so there are ancient laws that still apply today in the United States for all judges and justices. So the main one is you can't be a judge in your own case. That goes back thousands and thousands of years to like the Code of Hammurabi and the Torah. And you can't have a case before you when you're a judge that choosing one side would impact, would impact your portfolio or your sister's law practice or what have you. So that's been part of federal law for 200 years, and that law has been expanded, but not much. And what, on top of that, about 100 years ago, a group of judges decided, okay, we need to sort of say, not only are there these things based in law where you can't be a judge in your own case, but how should judges behave outside the courtroom in order to maintain the integrity of the institution? How should judges behave inside the courtroom to maintain the integrity of the institution? Should they, be nice? Should they chat with their colleagues before or after? Should they donate to political candidates? Should they, because there's no federal law that says a judge should or shouldn't donate to a political candidate, because that would be against the First Amendment. Anyone can donate to a political candidate under the First Amendment, but a judge probably shouldn't, right? Because if all political candidates in this country, or 99.9% of them, are of one political party or another, and you don't want to judge whether it be a Supreme Court justice or a lower court judge, giving $500 to the Democrats or $1,000 to the Republicans. So there are these, they're called canons. There are 5 different canons: no political activity, judges should comport themselves in a certain way, et cetera, which sort of describes what behaviors the public can expect the judges to have on and off the bench. And that does not apply to the Supreme Court for a very stupid reason, which is that code was written by lower court judges. So it's sort of like saying, okay, if there's a pitch clock in AAA baseball, the Mets and the Yankees can't have a pitch clock. Even if the pitch clock works, because the pitch clock was invented by a minor league affiliate, it can't be used for the big league. So that's SCOTUS's reasoning. Okay. Because it was written and promulgated by lower court judges, and lower court judges under the Constitution can't tell the Supreme Court what to do. We don't abide by the Code of Conduct for U.S. judges, which, okay, I think that's bullshit, but fine, write your own. It's not that hard. I mean, I sat down and did it in an afternoon, and it's, mine's not operative, but it's just not that hard to say, I'm a Supreme Court justice. These are the, I have different rules and concerns because there's only 9 of us, and, there's different roles being at the top versus being in the lower courts, but still you can write a code of conduct and make it applicable.
I have a question. Seems like there's a template, they could just, a little example to help get them on the road there.
Exactly.
Yeah. I had a question too. It's kind of like twofold, but like for the code of conduct, what is, I guess, a punishment if you break the code of conduct? Like, how does that function? And then also, does that mean that the Supreme Court like literally has no type of like guidelines, rules, like expectations, or a like code of conduct period, like nothing along those lines?
Yeah. So answering your second question first, the Supreme Court, if you're a justice, if you're one of the 9, you're supposed to follow the federal recusal statute that says you can't be a judge in your own case. You can't be a judge in a case that you've previously participated in as a lower court judge. You can't be a judge in a case if you know some of the material facts, like if you're a witness. You can't be a judge if you're, if you own IBM stock and it's an IBM case or an IBM affiliate case. And there are other prohibitions like that. The problem is there's no way to enforce it if you're a Supreme Court justice. The only punishment, to answer the first part of your question, if you're a Supreme Court justice, is the high bar of impeachment and removal. And only one justice has ever been impeached, and he wasn't removed. And the idea of getting 67, I mean, you could probably get a majority of the House to impeach somebody, like the president, for example. But getting 67 senators to remove a Supreme Court justice is just not going to happen. It's only happened for the lower court judges about a dozen times in our nation's history, and that's for like embezzlement, like really, really egregious stuff, or like serious sexual harassment.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court, I don't see it happening. If you're a lower court judge and you don't go by the code, the punishments are sensitivity training, a censure, a temporary removal of some cases from your docket. There are all sorts of embarrassing things that can be done when you're a lower court judge, because it's very rare for punishments to be doled out. So when they are meted out, it's a big deal, because it doesn't happen. Even the not even talking about impeachments, but the other sort of censure, that reprimand, they're very rare. That happens like once a year. So when it happens, it is quite embarrassing. But Supreme Court justice, even if I'm, just to give an example, Justice Alito, and I own Phillips 66 stock, and there's a Phillips 66 case, and he hears it, nothing's going to really happen, because he's not going to get impeached over it. But, he, under federal law, he's not supposed to hear the case, but who's going to stop him? I mean, that's
I was
going
to say, is there like replacement judges for those moments?
There's not. I mean, there should be, obviously. I mean, the part of
like substitutes.
There should be. I mean, there's Justice Breyer isn't doing anything right now. David Souter isn't doing anything right now. When there are recusals, there should be.
Why is that like that? Like, why is there some like shortage of judges? Like, why are people so anti like circulating these judges in and out, especially when there's issues and conflicts of interest? And like, why do we think like this about these justices and judges?
That's a really, really good question. Their justices should not be thought of in this sort of magisterial or majestic. Sorry, not magisterial. Majestic, oracular,
or like they're
philosopher king. They're not. Anyone could. I could name hundreds of individuals in this country who could do the job of Supreme Court justice. All the lower, so there are, essentially 2 tiers of lower federal courts: the courts of appeals, of which there are 13 courts and about 180 judges. And then below that are the district courts, the federal trial courts, and there's about 680 judges. Any one of the appeals court judges could definitely do the job of Supreme Court justice. I bet any of the 50 chief justices of any of the states, we're not even talking about the state, the federal system's like 2% of justice in this country. It gets outsized headlines. But if you look at the state Supreme Courts, easily the chief justices, if not many of the justices of the 50 state Supreme Courts, could do the federal Supreme Court's job. So that only 9, it was like such hubris with Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she said in 2014, who could President Obama replace me with who would uphold these ideals? I don't know, about 200 different people, Ruth. And you died, and there's been a major change on the court. So it's this level of hubris that justices, and an insularity that has been, I think, really toxic for the institution.
Yeah, like I feel like that's the grand thing that brings everyone together. They feel sort of the same way about this. But I feel like even the punishment for like the lower courts, those, yes, embarrassing within the context of your field, but like no everyday person that isn't super familiar with the court system or legal careers is going to be like, oh, a censure, that's terrible. They're gonna be like, I literally need to Google that. I don't understand its application, and okay, sucks for them. And
But also, why do we
They still
care
have
about
life tenure.
embarrassing? Why do we care about embarrassing judges? Like, if they do something wrong, they should be held accountable. Like, why are we
Correct.
worried about embarrassing
It's not.
them?
It's exactly the punishments are super weak. Like super
Yeah.
weak.
They don't fit the crime. They literally don't fit the crime.
They don't. They're judges that have,
Yeah.
you generally what happens if it's bad enough, we'll get a judge to resign. So like there was a judge in Kansas that was found to have had a history of sexual harassment. A judge in California, he died before he was able to resign. But yeah, the recent judges who have been Judge McGee of Kansas and Judge Kaczynski in California on the Ninth Circuit, they both resigned before the process could take place. So generally, that's the what happens is that the judges resign, and if you resign, I mean, that is embarrassing. That being said, you still get to collect your pension if you're of a certain age, and if you're not of a certain age, you get the money back that you put into the pension. And I'm working on some legislation to remove that pension, but it hasn't passed yet. So yeah, the punishments definitely don't fit the crime, and there's more I think that can be done to discipline the judges and ensure that there's apt punishments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like most HRs are more insane.
Literally more intense than.
I am forever just bamboozled. But we do want to just clarify a few terms for everyone that's listening. And that is starting with ethical oversight. When thinking about that term, what's just sort of the layman's way of looking at that?
Sure. I think it's really three ways of looking at. One is a lot of bodies in our government, state government, federal government, have a neutral party, an ombudsman, an inspector general that's saying, if you have an ethical question, like I don't know if I'm a judge and I don't know if I can sit on this case because maybe my wife's sister's cousin owns stock in one of the litigants, you should have somebody out there, somebody who you work with that is an expert in the field of ethics and HR and that sort of thing. It's that you can ask. A lot of that person does not really exist at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has something called the Office of Legal Counsel, which has like 2 or 3 lawyers, and they don't really do a lot or cross the justices very much. The lower courts, they're overseen by something called the Judicial Conference, and they have a committee that sort of discusses ethical issues, but again, they don't really do much. There's no inspector general like there is for the Department of Justice or Department of Defense. During the Iraq War, the inspector general was constantly coming out with reports saying, y'all gotta stop wasting $100 million on ice trucks, and that really over time made somewhat of an impact. But that person does not exist within the federal judiciary. It's also ethical oversight with your colleagues. I think that you have to have a good enough relationship. If I'm, Justice Sotomayor, I should be able to go to Justice Kagan and Justice Jackson and even maybe Justice Gorsuch and say, look, I'm thinking about this. Should I hear this case? And then it's sort of just a personal moral compass. Right. I think that we want our justices and our lower court judges to be moral and to have good characters, because as you pointed out, that there is not a lot of punishment if our justices and judges falter ethically or morally. So there really needs to be that internal compass so they don't even get to that point to begin with.
It's so crazy that we it's so much like hypocrisy. Like we value them and they're irreplaceable. They're the highest court in the land, nonpartisan, just like non-biased. And then there's also like no moral compass or like no accountability or like nothing to even be able that actually warrants holding them to that stature. And
even if you ask them to do it or bring it up, they take it so personally. They're like, oh, me? I'd never. What?
They're so sensitive.
They're very sensitive. They are very sensitive.
We hate that. Another term we want to clarify is conflict of interest. Can you explain that a little bit too?
Sure. So if I'm a judge, judges are between the ages of 37 and 107, and have had careers before they've gone into judging, before they were nominated and confirmed to be judges. They have families, they have financial investments, they have previous work histories, and they might, based on those things, based on their life experience, what they have in their portfolio, who their relatives are, they might have a rooting interest in a case that could come before them. So I mentioned, if my sister's law firm comes before me when I'm a judge, I need to recuse, I need to disqualify myself because that's a conflict of interest. If I own, I think I said IBM or whatever, if I own IBM stock, if they come before me, I need to recuse because if I rule for IBM, that could increase their stock price, which would increase my the value of my portfolio. So anything that is so those are direct conflicts. And then there's sort of like larger, sort of more inscrutable conflicts that I believe exist and need to be talked about. And the one that I've been speaking about most frequently recently is with Ginny Thomas and her husband, Justice Clarence Thomas. Ginny was working to undermine faith in the results of the 2020 election and outright overturn its results, while her husband, Clarence, was voting on and ruling on cases related to the 2020 election and related to the existence of the January 6th committee that's studying this attempted coup. So, there wasn't a direct one-to-one, right? It's not like Ginny was a elector from Pennsylvania or a Senate candidate from Virginia or in President Trump's cabinet, let's say, but she was agitating with those individuals to try to get there to be an overturn, changing of who won the election. And, I think to a neutral observer, though, there's not that one-to-one example that you see in federal law in terms of what constitutes a recusal necessarily. The perception of bias is bias. It actually does say that in federal law. It says if you have it's called the reasonable person standard. If you are a reasonable person, and I believe we're all reasonable people here, and we understand what happened in the Ginny and Clarence Thomas situation that I described, we would probably want Clarence Thomas to recuse from all January 6th and 2020 election cases based on his wife's activities.
Absolutely. I would support that.
1,000%. Well, we want to talk about also SCOTUS broad strokes. There are lots of issues going on with SCOTUS and some things that should be changed. And we're curious from your perspective, what you feel like some of those big ticket, if you will, items are. Like, what are those things? You have a little to-do list and you're like, we need to make this happen for the Supreme Court, some checks and balances. What do those look like?
Yeah, for me, the number one issue on that list is life tenure. Life tenure was bestowed to the founding generation of justices because King George was firing colonial judges, and that pissed off the colonies. So when they were writing their the Massachusetts Constitution, which predates the U.S. Constitution, they said, no, we can't be fired unless you have, the phrase is, judges shall hold their office during good behavior. And basically that meant, and that dates back to an old Latin phrase that was used in England in like the 16th century, but basically, unless you really fuck up, you're going to have the job for life. And that made it into the Constitution. And life has changed in the 230 odd years since the Constitution was ratified. Not only are people living longer, but the role of Supreme Court justice is so much powerful than it was envisioned even 50 years ago, let alone 230. And there's paralysis between the branches, all the major decisions. I mean, if you were to tell me when I was growing up in the 90s that, marriage and healthcare and who wins a presidential election and whether or not we can respond to climate change and women's health care and whether or not there's going to be a gun on the subway. If you told me all these things in the 90s, that this would be decided by 9 lawyers in robes and not the people's representatives, I would have said you're crazy. But that's exactly what's happening. So to me, there's no reason that justices' life tenure needs to be on the Supreme Court. I'm working with members of Congress, and they've introduced a couple versions of this bill that says, okay, you get to keep your life tenure on the Supreme Court, but only 18 years of which shall be you get to keep your life tenure in the federal judiciary, but only 18 years of that can be on the Supreme Court. So after 18 years, you rotate to a lower court, a circuit court. There's one in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Atlanta, Denver, et cetera, major cities in the country. And this is what Sandra Day O'Connor has done after she retired. This is what David Souter has done. About half the justices who've retired in the last 80 years have done this. And so with 9 justices, 18 years, you get a new justice added to the court every 2 years. And it would be predictable. You wouldn't have the justices on the Supreme Court simply there because some random 80-year-old died, that's right. Basically who's getting the picks is when it's super morbid, but the picks are happening based on when octogenarians are dying. So this 18 years with a new justice every 2 years means that every presidential term gets 2 picks. So we just know every 2 years, it's a new justice. Every presidential election, you're voting for the president and that president will get 2 picks, as opposed to, Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump were both presidents for 4 years. One of them got 3 justices, one of them got 0. So that's not exactly equitable. So, term limits, I think, would be the number one ticket item that I'm most interested in.
Totally.
And that with the 18 years, is the 18 years sort of designed with the idea of making sure that one happens every 2 years, or is there any other magic to like the 18?
I mean, it's chai in Judaism, in Hebrew. No, there's no reason. Yeah, no, it's not my idea, right? I mean, this is something that has been kicking around for several decades. But I think 18 years, it's 3 Senate terms. It's long enough. I mean, what I'll often say is it's long enough to make your mark on American law, but not so long that you're becoming long in the tooth and past your prime. I mean, in every generation, there's been a justice who has lost their marbles, has had cognitive decline before they left the court. The most recent generation, there were several justices that were getting very close to that cognitive decline: Rehnquist, Kennedy, Scalia, Ginsburg, but they all died or retired before that happened. The previous generation, sadly, I mean, I could go through the list, but this is a real thing that happens at the Supreme Court and the lower courts. But I think 18 years would help guard against cognitive decline, and we know that that's something that we don't want to have our top judges compromise cognitively.
That's very fair. Very logical
or falling asleep.
And very common sense.
Yeah, or falling asleep. That's true.
Yeah, I know we talk about this too, just with like all these big politicians or the Supreme Court justices. Like, why do you want to keep working when you're 80, 90? Like, that's just crazy to me. Like, go rest, go chill by the beach, like do something. And then I also wanted to point out that I'm glad you talked about lawyers in robes, because if you want to add to any of your policy solutions, just maybe a little tiny amendment to one of them, just be like changing the costumes. Like, those gotta go.
I love that.
I also think that could like demystify them. That can kind of change like.
What would you have them wear?
Just regular clothes, like everyone else in the government. You know, just like that. That could also just change people's minds of like they aren't holier than thou. You know.
Yeah, I like it.
Optics.
Maybe
it's all
add
optics.
it in there. Let us know if you do it. But just this little sneaker. A little sneaker policy moment. Well, next we want to talk about the relationship between SCOTUS, the media, and the public. Again, just this same theme. But can you talk about what is a broadcast media ban and what is the impact of this ban?
Sure. So there are no cameras allowed in the Supreme Court courtroom. There's no audio recording microphones that are allowed as well. The only journalists allowed in the Supreme Court courtroom are journalists who show up with pens and papers. Some from, NBC, ABC, CBS, but they're only allowed to, use a pen and a paper, like the Times and the Post and the Journal and all the others. And that's just, it's something that to me is just kind of ridiculous. The very least, SCOTUS does record the audio of its oral arguments. It only hears about 65 or 70 cases a year, and each case only lasts about an hour on a single day. So, this is something that would be very easy to film.
Totally.
It's not like a trial where there are juries and witnesses and exhibits. It's literally 2 lawyers. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 and, certain exceptions. But generally, it's 2 lawyers, 9 justices. You can have a camera the size of a fist hanging, above the justices and one next to the lawyers, and it would be very easy to manage, but they've never allowed that. A couple folks have tried to sneak, pen cameras into the Supreme Court, and that's been a whole thing. But, I've been to SCOTUS, and I've got to tell you that, first of all, it's a pain in the ass to do it, because as I'm not a member of the media, I've got to show up at 5 a.m. and wait in line. And the court hears cases from October to April. So a lot of those months are very, very cold, standing in line outside for 5 hours. Sometimes they let you in at like 7:30 if you're lucky, but yeah, sometimes if not. It just depends how early you get there. And it was just it's awful. But broadcast media if you had a broadcast, more people would watch, more people would learn about the court, more people would be participating in the civic life. The audio that is recorded by the Supreme Court itself is given to, it depends on the month, but usually the Associated Press or NPR or C-SPAN, and they will broadcast it out live to the public. But that live audio feed has only existed because of the pandemic since the start of the pandemic. During the pandemic, the whole building was closed down. So the Supreme Court's like, okay, we'll allow for live audio. But that's only been a pandemic era change. And there's no guarantee that live audio will continue to exist in the fall once all the pandemic restrictions are lifted. And what happened pre-pandemic is they recorded the audio at SCOTUS, but SCOTUS would only release it on Friday afternoons. So you'd have these cases that were argued Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And by the time the audio came out, it was old news. So no one was using it. So it's pretty much useless. So lower courts of appeals, state Supreme Courts, I think something like 42 out of 50 state Supreme Courts allow cameras in the courtroom. So it's kind of ridiculous that SCOTUS is the laggard, and the idea that, we can't figure out a way to do this in a respectful, unobtrusive way in 2022 is ridiculous to me.
Totally agree. And for changing this, how do we go about doing that? Like, is this a situation where there needs to be some legislation? Does this need to come from them? How does this change?
No, it's a great question, and it's hard to know what the answer is, to be honest. There is legislation. It hasn't passed Congress, but there's been bills introduced, I want to say for 20 or 25 years now. But for whatever reason, I think because the justices are very, very good at lobbying, because they do lobby. I know that for a fact. I think the justices have just said, we don't want these bills to advance. Like, we respect your ability to introduce them, but we don't want them to advance. And I think part of that is a generational thing. I think that if you look at the court, there's a real generational divide between the justices that were born in I guess Breyer's gone. So the justices that were born in the 40s and the 50s, and those that were born in the 60s and 70s. So I don't think that some of the younger justices like Barrett or Jackson or Gorsuch or Kavanaugh, or maybe even Kagan, would have problems with cameras in the Supreme Court. But the older justices like Alito, Roberts, Thomas, not sure where Sotomayor is. I think she's probably okay with the cameras folks. But, I think it's a real generational divide. And for people I have no idea how you guys are, but let's just assume we're all in the same generation. People in our generation, we're just like, video is ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Like,
totally.
I only process information generally, like, and social media is optimized for video. I'm like constantly watching video on my phone. Obviously, TV's on all the time. Well, not right now, but TV's on all the time. And so, like, we process information when there is sound and when there are pictures. And so, and we're always on video for whether we like it or not. And so, to me, I think that's just something that is not part of the older generation. And when there's a full generational turnover and you've got, Gen Xers and millennials on the court versus boomers, and up until recently, they had a silent generation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Breyer was part of the silent generation. So once that turnover is complete, I think we'll get cameras in the court. I do think that you're going to have to get all 9 of them to agree. I mean, yeah, and I don't think that the bills, the cameras in the courtroom bill and the Supreme Court Cameras Act, whatever they're called, I don't think those will pass, just because I think that the justices are just very good at lobbying, and they really want to be able to set their own policy. Which is a shame, because I lobby for this stuff all the time. But like,
I was gonna
justices
say,
are better lobbyists than I am.
Yeah, I would love to kind of get also a snapshot into the lobbying that surrounds the Supreme Court, be it, nominating new justices to now, like, the issues that we're seeing them, these cases that they're taking up are like very issue based, very political. Like, what does the lobbying look like behind the scenes around the Supreme Court? Because I think a lot of people probably don't realize how heavy it is, because they're supposed to be this like non-political body. But like, can you give us a behind the scenes snapshot of what that looks like?
Sure. So, I mean, the thing is, nowadays, right, the Supreme Court has a very discretionary docket. It chooses what it takes the vast majority of the time. That there have been various laws that have been passed, but about 30, 40 years ago, there's a law that passed that basically said, you're the Supreme Court, you can take whatever cases that you want. So it's no coincidence that we, with this extreme conservative majority, we had a environmental case, an abortion case, and a gun case, like right off the bat, as soon as the 6-3 supermajority was constituted, basically, or the first full term of the 6-3, which was this past term that just ended. A lot of the lobbying happens at the lower court level, and you'll have individuals who are friends with the justices or are frequent contributors to amicus briefs, which are just friend of the court briefs, or merits briefs, petitions or other petitions that reach the court. You'll have these high-powered lawyers on the briefs, right? So if I am, John Roberts, and I get a million briefs, like 99% of what the justices do are read briefs. But if I get a brief and I see that Paul Clement, my good buddy from back in the George H.W. Bush days, is on the brief, I'm about 20,000 times more likely to read that brief. Right. So if you are a conservative organization like the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, which took the gun case to the Supreme Court, or there was a praying football coach, a coach that prayed at the 50-yard line. Mm-hmm. He was told to stop. I didn't want to stop. Like, if you get Paul Clement on your brief as the praying football coach, that, okay, this is something that the conservative movement really wants to bring to the Supreme Court and believes it has the votes to overturn whatever the restriction against praying at the 50-yard line was. So so that lobbying occurs a lot based on these relationships and based on like, there was something, an investigative piece called Echo Chambers that came out about 8 years ago. And it basically said, here are the 60 lawyers who put together these briefs, and they get about, 14 to 15% of their cases heard by SCOTUS, whereas every other lawyer in the country gets 0.00014 or 15% of their. So it's really a person-to-person thing. And, these lawyers are former clerks. They themselves were almost on the Supreme Court. Maybe they're a former judge or they're married to a judge. So the lobbying happens right when the case is filed. But if you have these high-powered lawyers and they're, which are not cheap, right? They cost sometimes like $2,000 an hour, insane numbers. There's money if you're a justice reading the brief and you see their name, there's money behind it, and there's a movement behind it to get that case to you. So I think that's part of what a lot of people don't realize. Like, these cases don't appear by accident, right? Just like the affirmative. Sorry, go ahead.
About amicus briefs, like, is there a good reason why that exists, or is that like really problematic that you just take up cases because people involved? Like, isn't that problematic? And is there a good reason?
Conflict of interest round 2? Like,
exactly. No, there's huge conflicts there. I think that amicus briefs initially came about because the Supreme Court is asked to rule on a lot of things that they frankly don't know a ton about. There's a long history of Supreme Court cases, just to give one example, like Tennessee versus Mississippi and Texas versus Oklahoma, where states are suing each other over water rights. And like, there's an aquifer under Memphis, I think, in Tennessee, and it like also goes under Mississippi, and the drinking water in Jackson, but also Chattanooga comes from there. Like, basically, there are these cases, and it says this in the Constitution. If two states, it randomly says this, and the Constitution doesn't say very much, but it does say if two states sue each other, SCOTUS, it has to go to SCOTUS. You can't go to a third state. So none of the justices are water experts.
Yeah.
Recently, there was a case about cell phone tower data. Right? If I'm a criminal or an alleged criminal, and the cops want to know if I was, near the Franklin Avenue subway stop, well, they can pull my cell phone records because there's a cell tower right there. And if there was a ping at a certain time, that would show that I was in a certain place at a certain time, which made me more likely to have committed whatever crime that they're trying to solve. Is that a search or seizure under the Fourth Amendment? I don't know. And neither did none of the old ass justices. So there were amicus briefs that said, this is the history of the Fourth Amendment. This is what a cell tower is. So there are cases in which amicus briefs and having these sort of supposedly neutral third parties, or sometimes they have an opinion, right? Like the Fourth Amendment, maybe it's the ACLU is often doing amicus briefs, and they have a lot of expertise in searches and seizures, obviously. But the process has been abused. Like, for the most recent abortion case, there were 150 amicus briefs. Like, you don't need to hear from 150 different, or say there's 75 per side. You don't need 75 different ways of like trying to figure out like whether or not, the state of Connecticut in 1960 considered a fetus being a person. Or it was a little overkill, and a lot of it is done as a fundraiser for those third-party organizations. Look, and SCOTUS, their rules are very lax, so they pretty much accept every brief, and then these groups go and say, oh, look, we got our brief accepted by SCOTUS, give us $1 million, and it just sort of feeds itself.
Nothing like a donation to really keep the people going. Well,
fixthecourt.com/donate in case you're curious.
Oh yeah, there we go. There's a good plug. We love a plug. Okay, well, on another note, we do want to talk about expanding the court, because this is another thing everyone's been talking about recently. I feel like there was some chatter even a few years ago about it, but now it's obviously back on everyone's radar. What's the story with doing this? How would that work? And like, is there actually a pathway for this, or is it more of just one of those like ideas where people are like, that would be great, but like it's never going to get off the ground?
Yeah, I don't see it getting off the ground. The thing is that it theoretically could be passed by simple legislation, that you just pass a law and says the current law says the Supreme Court is 9 justices, and the revision would say the Supreme Court is 13 justices. And then as soon as that goes into effect, Joe Biden would have 4 justices to pick, and they would be seated on the court. The problem is that currently there are only 3 senators that support that bill, right? It's called the Judiciary Act of 2021. And you need 60 senators to pass laws these days, unfortunately.
3 total?
Three total are co-sponsored. Markey, Warren, and Smith, I want to say. So the 2 Massachusetts senators.
So Democrats don't even want this?
They don't seem to want it. And so, I think that speaks volumes, right? They don't see a path to it, and they feel like it is a good talking point for Republicans, right? The Democrats, they want to defund the police and teach CRT and expand the Supreme Court, right? It fits on a bumper sticker. And expanding the Supreme Court is just not popular with the vast majority of the country at this point. I mean, it's pretty even among liberals, but and who's to say even, right? So let's say the court was expanded tomorrow. Well, what if Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have control of the Senate? There's an election in a few months. The Republicans could easily get control of the Senate back. It's a tough map for Democrats. And so if they get the control of the Senate back, okay, so Biden has 4 picks, but the Republicans aren't going to vote on them. They've already done this in 2016 with Obama's pick, Merrick Garland. They're just going to sit on them. Mm-hmm. And then when President Ron DeSantis comes in on January 20th, 2025,
don't say that.
He'd be more than happy. He would be more than happy to take those 4 seats that the Democrats passed and give them to 4 arch conservative judges. Yeah. So it would be a 10-3 Supreme Court.
The only way that it would work if put into place is also if term limits are put into place. Otherwise, forget about it. And if anything, really, it's like it's a circle back to the term limits. It's
hopefully,
like more powerful than that. I mean, obviously now I'm just blowing smoke over here. But
tell that to Liz Warren. Yeah, no, I mean, look, there are bills that would both expand the court and put term limits on them. They're a little complicated. It's a lot of math involved, because if you have 13 justices and each of them serving 18 years, and you've got to have a new justice added to the court every 16.6 months, but sometimes that's during the summer and Congress isn't in, and sometimes it's like right before an election. So like I have several Google spreadsheets to try to figure this out that I send to members of Congress and staff, because like when they're like, oh yeah, I like this idea, and they're like, oh god, there's a lot of math, and so I got to do it for them, and I send it back out, which is fine. I'm happy to. Yeah. But the point being that there's it's one of these things that's like a panacea, right? It sounds so great. We even say like Medicare for all. Wow, wouldn't it be great if every American had health care? Probably, but like it would also be great not to wait 17 hours in a doctor's office, like in a lot of places that have socialized medicine. Like I think there are definitely pluses and minuses of each of one of these, but people vote with their feet, and they vote. And the fact that there are only 3 Democrats on the Senate that want to do this right now. There was an article I was actually reading this morning where like another dozen were like, okay, hey guys, have you changed your mind? And to the Democratic senators, and none of them have. Mm-hmm. Look, I'm not saying that term limits is at this point any better. I have 0 senators on my term limits bill. I've got plenty in the House, but just for a long-term way the goal here is to reduce the power of the court. It's not to make the court, in my view, a super legislature, like a second Senate that will have a ever increasing number of justices that, when the Republicans are in power, they'll add, and the Democrats, all of a sudden we'll have 86 justices. My wish is to a more powerful Congress, representatives we actually vote for, and a less powerful Supreme Court. And term limits, I think, is a way to do that, and court expansion is not.
Quick question. Do you guys also, or is there any type of like reform around the nomination process?
Yeah, it's a little tough, because with nominations, I look at nominations like a congressional election or the presidential election, like you're voting for this person. And it's a little like, because we're a C3, 501c3 versus 501c4, it's a little iffy. Like we don't oppose or support specific candidates for the Supreme Court. We'll do vetting of them or whatever, but we're not going to say, yay, Kavanaugh, no Kavanaugh, whatever. But in terms of reforming the process, I've thought about this for a while. I don't have any great ideas. The one idea I have that's mediocre is to flip the process around, right? So currently, the justices, just thinking about the Supreme Court justices, because it's a multi-day affair. Lower court judges, it's usually a morning or an afternoon, but Supreme Court justices, it's a multi-day affair. So instead of having these like very long question and answer sessions where the justices don't really say anything over the course of 2 days, after which there's something called questions for the record, where the senators will write to the nominee, and all 22 senators will write like 50 questions, and the nominee will produce 1,000-page document with my idea would be flip it. Have the questions first, written questions first, limit it to 20 questions per senator. And then of those 20 questions, 5 of them can be asked, re-asked, or expounded upon during that 2-day Q&A session. So instead of having this long, rambling, disjointed, really frustrating Q&A, and then having these questions for the record that are written out, flip it so we sort of know going in, okay, these are going to be the issues that are going to be contentious. These are the issues that are going to be expounded upon, and just sort of limit the question to things that have already been asked, but just ask them in a more open way. So that's my idea.
But what about like the way, like even just looking at like,
it's not good. It's not a good idea, but it's an idea. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just with like Obama and how he couldn't even get, his confirmation through. Like, is there any type of like reforms that people have thought of that could potentially alleviate that issue?
Yeah, I don't think there's a way to do it without, I mean, this is kind of depressing. I don't think there's a way to do it without amending the Constitution, and that's probably not going to happen. The one idea that we had recently was, it's in the term limits bill. It's HR 5140, the Supreme Court Term Limits and Regular Appointments Act. In addition to the 18-year term limits, it says, if the Senate doesn't act within 120 days of an appointment, the Senate forfeits its advice and consent role, and the nomination is assumed to be confirmed. So it says, shit or get off the pot in 120 days. And, if you don't like it, then vote them down, but at least give them a vote within 120 days. I don't frankly believe that section is constitutional, which is a bit problematic, but that's, I mean, George Bush gave a speech saying it should be 180 days. So, I mean, there has been over the years consensus that this is ridiculous, but when George Bush said it in 2002, it's a very different world than us talking about it in 2022. The hyperpartisanship has only increased 20-fold since then.
Right. Yeah. Well, that and the robes are my two reforms that I'm hoping you get to start working on. That's my lobbying for the day.
So, because the Supreme Court justices of Canada wear red robes and wigs.
That's giving Volturi from Twilight, and I'm not. That's worse.
Who
red
from
robes. What? In Twilight, the Volturi, it's like the vampire judges.
Oh, they're vampire judges. I gotta look this up.
I'm absolutely deceased.
And you'll see, and you'll actually be like, wait, that's accurate. But yeah, they can just wear
we'll work on
suits and power suits like everyone else.
There's got to be something fun to it too, though. Like, there's got to be a moment, but like
they can still have a gavel. Do they have gavels in the Supreme Court?
Well, Chief Justice Roberts has a gavel. Actually, no, Chief Justice Roberts doesn't have a gavel. The marshal has a gavel. She'll gavel in the session. So yeah, the justices don't even have gavels.
Maybe they can have like little like brooches
cute.
or maybe a
Those
little
are
accessory.
so dated.
Well, just
members of Congress have
accessory.
pins. They're like little pins that members of Congress wear that denote that help people know that they're a member of Congress. So yeah, I'd be fine with suits and pins.
Me and Sam will work on outfit and accessory options for you, but just maybe start working on getting the robes out of the equation.
On it.
But in the meantime, while we, obviously brainstorm a few ideas here, how can people get involved? How can people, very important policy. How can people support what you guys are doing and try and get some of these reforms, robes aside, across to the finish line?
Sure. So we're obviously on social media at Fix the Court on Twitter and facebook.com/fixthecourt. Email is always a good way to get in touch with us, info@fixthecourt.com, and fixthecourt.com/donates. Also a great resource. As I mentioned, we're a 501c3 tax exempt organization. And yeah, I mean, we love hearing, new, like earlier today, I had a call with somebody that I've known for a while talking about term limits, and he came up with this idea that I hadn't heard of. And it's like, it's really exciting talking to you guys. I mean, beyond the robes, but just talking through the conflict of interest.
Like
just talking through this, you think of other ideas and new ways of attacking problems, and we love hearing from folks. So check us out online and via email.
And if people want like some more action items too, of like, can they reach out to you? Like, can people call their reps on some of these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Calling your reps is really important. There's, on fixthecourt.com, there's a list. Probably need to make it a little more prominent, but thank you for the reminder of the different bills that we support and want to get through the House and the Senate. There's a bill called the Supreme Court Ethics Reform and Transparency Act, which would just modernize their whole conflict of interest rubric that hopefully is going to get a vote on the House floor. Nothing like it has ever been voted on, even by either House of Congress. So it'd be really exciting if we get a vote. So that's We got 9 new co-sponsors on that today. So yeah, there are a lot between ethics and term limits. There are a lot of different bills that are floating around that could use some more co-sponsors, and we'd love to get your supporters from Girl on the Gov to call their members.
Call your members,
Absolutely.
ask for no more robes, and major SCOTUS reforms. There it is.
Done.
Well, such an important conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really glad we got to talk about all of this in such a crucial time for this topic. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.